everyone, I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and for a very long time I have had this urge to mix all 40 of my Jacquard acid dyes together to see what the average color is. And well, on June 1st, I did just that. Back at the beginning of the month, I did a 5.5-hour live stream where we mixed all 40 colors together and then took this combo Muk Color and used it with a variety of different techniques to get a sense of what the color is and does it break. Now, why did I want to do this project? Well, when looking at all 40 of the Jacquard acid dye colors, it seemed like there were so many reds, maybe a fair number of blues, but very few, say, greens and purples. And I was just really curious what that average color might be. Would it skew very red, or could it be more of a total neutral color? Now, my original hypothesis was that we would get some kind of dusty pink or purple, because this is similar to the average color that I got when I mixed 50 different food coloring colors together, and it seems to be an average that other people who mix things together to see the final color tend to get. So that's my hypothesis. But we don't know, it could be green. I didn't think so, but it could be green. When I divided the colors into some various categories, the balance actually seemed to be a little bit better than I'd originally expected, with about half and half warm and cool tones. But when you're mixing things together, it really ultimately depends on the levels of pigmentation. And so it's possible that some red pigments could be overrepresented in the totality of all these 40 colors. And that's what we're going to explore and find out. So today, we're going to take this mixture and we are going to dip dye to see if it breaks. We're going to do some tonals, we're going to do some speckles, and have a lot of fun along the way. I keep referring to this mixture as a muck dye. What's a muck dye? Well, Dharma Trading Company every once in a while will release a muck collection of colors that are one batch, won't ever be repeated. And my hypothesis with these colors is that there was an error when they were trying to mix a pre-mixed color, and so they have a batch that wasn't quite right, but is still a pretty color. But since they don't have a recipe, they can't replicate the creation. And while there's a little bit that could be replicated with the color I'm mixing today, there's also an element of I didn't record exactly how much of each color I put in. So if you were gonna go and make your own, it's likely gonna be very similar, but could have some differences. So before we jump in to go take a closer look at the dyes and the yarn, please make sure you're subscribed to the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel and turn on your notifications so that way you don't miss a new video and you can be notified when I do a long live stream like I did back when I filmed this video. Today we are going to dye 4 main yarn bases. Knit Pick Stroll, which is 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon. This is the base that we will do over every technique. We will use Wool of the Andes worsted weight yarn, which is 100% Peruvian highland wool. Sometimes it's easier to get dyes to break on non-superwash yarn, so we will use this base for that. I also have some Swish DK, which is 100% superwash merino. Finally, we have a double-stranded Stroll sock blank, which is 2 strands of Stroll knit together that we will use as a yarn mop as we are mixing all 40 dyes together. I will wipe off my popsicle stick or any extra dye onto these blanks, and so we will see all 40 colors randomly placed on there. I am going to pre-soak the 2 sock blanks in some water with 2 tablespoons of white vinegar. It doesn't matter if this isn't perfectly soaked or saturated and there is some dry spots left, because since we're doing a colorway that will likely have a lot of white left on these, some dry areas doesn't matter. But since these blanks are double-stranded, the colorways that we get will be able to produce a perfect matched pair of yarn. For all of the rest of the yarn, I pre-soaked it in plain tap water for at least 20 to 30 minutes. I am going to mix all 40 of these colors together in a random order and I'm really excited to see what color we will get. While I am mixing up the dry dye powders, I have these two blanks as yarn mops. On one of them, I'm going to be wiping the stick. The other, I might take a pinch, a tiny bit more powder, and just sort of tap it on before wiping the stick onto the yarn mop, just to have two blanks that I have all 40 colors on. These are actually going to be off camera in this episode while I am doing the color mixing. But if you go back and check out the live stream from when I was mixing the colors and filming these videos, there you will be able to see these mops on camera. I put on my rubber respirator with P100 filters, safety glasses, and gloves. And with popsicle sticks, we started combining all 40 of my Jacquard acid dye colors. I decided to weigh out approximately half a gram of each of the 40 colors, so then we would end up with about 20 grams of this color mixture. Right off the bat, when I started, I did not have quite half a gram of bright yellow, because that's probably the color that I've used the most of all of my Jacquard acid dyes so far, but I did have another jar, so I grabbed that and we were able to continue. I would say that for most colors, I got pretty close to 0.5, 0.52 grams. But there were a couple that were a little bit higher, maybe even up. I think there was one color, I forget which, where I had 0.6 grams. But ultimately, this is my Muk mixture of combined colors, and I won't be able to make a mixture that is exactly like this in the future. Maybe I could get close, but it would not be exact because who knows how big of a difference those tiny little measurements make. Ultimately, probably not a big difference because there are 40 colors in here, and 0.1 of a gram out of 20 grams isn't a huge impact. But as the live stream chat reminded me, this is art, not science. The goal is to have fun and see what the approximate average of these 40 colors would be. While I was measuring the colors, I did take some short breaks every 10 colors, but I did still find myself being a little bit more heavy-handed towards the end with the final 10 colors. I do also have these clips that I filmed every 10 colors so you could see how our dye pile looks as time progressed. Some of the colors were more clumpy, while others felt more like a fine powder, almost sand-like. And it really did seem like some of the paler colors, like the ecru and silver gray, were more sandy, and then some of the more pigmented colors clumped a little bit more. And it is now time to put these fabulous yarn mops into a steamer basket. I am going to steam set them for 30 minutes and then turn off the basket and let them cool. Okay, let's stir this up. Now, this container does not have like the smoothest bottom, so it's not necessarily the best candidate for making a mixture, but we will do our best. What I don't want to do is shake it up. I don't want to try to mix it that way. But what I'm looking for as I am stirring and mixing are there will be probably some tiny clumps where some pigments are bigger. But what I'm looking for are large individual clumps of color. But I would say this is looking, I see some yellow pops in it, but it is looking a little bit reddish, maybe a little bit brown, which is not completely unexpected. And since I'm filming the intro for this video after the fact, I will note that my original hypothesis is that the average will be some kind of dusty pink or purple. That was my original hypothesis, since we haven't tested it yet. It does look very pigmented. This mixture is not perfect, but I do think that I have reasonably mixed it, and now let's get ready for our first look. Before we mix up those colors, let's set up our first look. This is my 4-inch deep full-size catering steam pan, and in it I think I want to have just 4 cups of water plus 1 tablespoon of white vinegar. And now I'm going to put in 100 grams of Knit Picks Stroll fingering weight yarn. And we are not super low immersion, but when we do our first look at our color mixture, we will be doing it on this skein, and then I can go and just move this to the stovetop to heat set it after. Let's see, take a little bit of this powder onto our spoon and see what we can see. I am sort of speckling this on. Ooh! Okay, so I see a dusty purple with like turquoise. It's like reddish, but like right there it was very blue. So I absolutely see something breaking. I see, ooh, this is really cool. I mean, this could be because this is the spoon I mixed it with and something stuck to it. That first thing that went in, we had this blue finish. I'll get another spoon so we can see that again. But I see those blues there and then reds. And if you look up to this area where it's more speckled, I 100% see red and blue speckles in there for sure. Ooh, I see a yellow speck over here. It kind of is sunk in, but there was like a little yellow speck right there for a moment. This is cool. Let me get another spoon. Actually, before I get another spoon, let's tap this one out. So I see a very beautiful purple here. A dusty, like a dusty eggplant type purple. It could look different. It could look more brown, more saturated, or less saturated. But that is a very pretty color. Now it is still possible for colors to shift again, for colors to shift more once we apply heat. But sort of just, we'll do a proper speckled colorway in a little bit. I'm just adding this on in little bits all over. Then with our spoon, I'm trying to see if I can recreate that blue. This blue region right here may be because it was the spoon I used to mix. While I see blues in the mixture, what I am not seeing is like what I saw with that first one. So I think that very first look may have been a result of me like having the pigments on that spoon as I wiped it in. But it is really, really cool. Really, really cool. Now let's bring this over to the heat. Okay, I'm going to turn on the heat and I'll check back in a tiny bit to see if anything has noticeably shifted with the addition of heat. It has been a few moments. We are hot. The purple, I think that the purple could lean brown in some areas, but we're seeing some more breaking. That blue right there. I am now seeing for sure like a yellow speck there. We did see yellow specks in the powder itself. And then over here, there's another little yellow speck among all of these other colors. But I do want to see now, if I come on one of these areas, now that we've had heat, and I sort of try to spread it out, what we might see. And it is still looking very, very purple to me, which I think is awesome, which I think is so much fun. So I'm gonna go ahead and let this heat on low for, I would say, 20 to 30 minutes. I am now gonna add 4 cups of temp water. I think I still have 7 minutes on a timer that I set late, but I'm curious to see how well things have set and just give it more liquid overall.
We absolutely have some multicolored specks that are sticking around, but I am moving everything. Things do appear to be pretty well set. Some of the areas, like right here, feels a little bit more of a true brown finish, whereas this spot feels very purple, this one feels very red. Maybe the average is going to be sort of chestnut-like. But I do believe that this first teal patch really was just sort of an artifact from the mixing. Coming back to our first look, which has pretty much cooled, let's flip it. Okay, we still have some patches of white, but the color penetration is good for sure. I debated adding more. Ooh, look at that blue. Wow, that was like a blue section that kind of went on, and there's more like a blue section there. I think what I'm going to do is set this aside so that way it can cool, and I can, well, it is cool, but so that way I can wash it. Part of me is tempted to add more color, but since this really is the first look at this dye, I think I'm going to leave it here as it is, because I think it's a very fun yarn. Compared to the average of the colors, these rainbow yarn mops feel extremely different with all of the colors represented in there. We do potentially have some colors blending, but I am going to set this aside and wash it in a little bit.
This first look really excites me. I still think we're very much in a purplish, dusty purple family, and it looks like we probably have some breaking. Well, we absolutely have some breaking with speckling, but there's a potential that maybe we'll see some speckling with dip dyeing. No matter what, there is a huge contrast between the colors that we saw pop out in that pan at our first look and all 40 colors individually on our blank mops. There's no real comparison there, but we have more to explore with our dye mixture. Now I am going to go make a dye stock, and since I have a lot of plans, I'm going to go ahead and make 1 liter of a 1% stock solution. This means that I will have a concentration of 1 gram of dye dissolved in 100 milliliters of liquid. So I'm going to measure out 10 grams of dye and then dissolve that into a total volume of 1 liter.
I added some hot tap water to the 10 grams of dye that I measured out and then started stirring. There are definitely some particles in there that were not dissolving as quickly as others. When you stir and you sort of see it go up on the side, you can see little sort of dots almost. And so what we want is for those to dissolve completely. But thankfully, it did not appear to be gelling or clumping really badly like my nemesis Sun Yellow does. I did notice in my 1 cup that as I was rinsing it out that there were some yellows that were a little bit late to the party to dissolve, which is another reason to let the dye in the cup sit for a little bit in between stirring, just to give some time for those dyes to start to dissolve. Maybe that time sitting isn't that important, but more time and like times to wait and then stir more should help everything dissolve completely. After I was pretty confident that things were dissolved well, I added more hot tap water to bring our total volume of this dye stock to 1 liter, and then I poured it into a stock solution bottle using a funnel. There is a tiny bit of some particulate left in the color in the cup that I was mixing from, so I am going to check and see what color that looks like just by adding water. Let's see, I would say that those particulates just don't appear to be dissolving at all, even in this water. There are some colors that have particulates that you kind of need to filter out, so that could be that, but yeah, I'm not that concerned, but it is looking a little more brownish to me now. But if we wipe inside of this, I would say dusty purple still stands, but it might end up looking brown in some cases. I'm very excited. The more I let this sit, the more brown and less purple it's looking. This could have some of those yellows that with some colors just seem to be towards that end finish. So we'll keep an eye on it.
Now that we have our stock, how am I going to determine how much dye I want to use to make a tonal? Well, I think I want to start at a 1% depth of shade. Depth of shade is defined as the number of grams of dye per 100 grams of fiber. So a 1% depth of shade would be 1 gram of dye per skein, per 100 gram skein of yarn. But you could also technically define this as 1/40th% depth of shade of true black, 1/40th% depth of shade of bright yellow, etc., etc. I'm not going to do the breakdown because there were a little bit of inconsistencies with my mixing, and also with 40 colors, it gets a little bit ridiculous to define it that way. So we're going to be looking at the total depth of shade, which is in reference to this mixture that I mixed. And why start at 1%? That's a fairly safe place to start for most colors. Some colors you need less, especially if it's a pastel pre-mixed color. Other colors you might need more, like with black. Typically, you might want to go up to even a 4% to get a true dark black color. So that can vary. But once we make our 1% depth of shade, then we can decide how high and how low we want to examine. So let's go set up some cool vats to make 5 different tonals.
To look at the tonals, we are going to use these plastic shoe boxes to do a cool vat approach, which means that I'm going to let the yarn and the dye sit in one of these containers for about 24 hours, and then we will steam set it once the color has absorbed. With an asterisk, if the color doesn't absorb, then we can go ahead and move it into a kettle so it can absorb that way. Now we're gonna start, before deciding the full range we wanna do, with a 1% depth of shade. So I'm gonna measure out and add 100 milliliters of our stock to here, because that would give us 1 gram of dye for the 100 grams of yarn that we want to dye. But I do want to point out this like residual powder is looking sort of like a yellowish brown now, but I see other bits floating in there. So this likely is not going to be the best behaved dye stock I have ever seen in my life. But we did mix this very recently. I'm shaking it up as well as I can. It is a pretty full, so it's hard to shake super well. So now there's no acid in here yet, but we're gonna add our 100 milliliters of the dye into the liquid, and we are gonna stir this up. And the color is so dark, it's hard to say what kind of color I think it is. But when we add the yarn and start to get a feel for how dark it is, that'll tell us if we want to try, say, a 4% depth of shade, which would be 4 times as amount of dye as this, or if we don't want to go up that high. Okay. And now I'm going to come in with, again, this yarn had no acid in it yet, and we are going to add the yarn here to the pot. And so this color is very much, it is purpley. It is a very dusty purple. I could see, it is feeling, if it is brown, which it may feel more brown when it dries. If it is brown, it is extraordinarily cool toned. So I am just gently mixing this up to get a feel for this color. And this, I'd say, is a reasonable pigmentation. I am still not sure I want to try 4%. That might be, I initially made sure I had enough dye so I could try a 4%. I don't think I want to go that high, just because I'm not sure if it would all dissolve. But certainly we have, at a 1% depth of shade, a very pigmented color, which is wonderful. So now I'm going to add just shy of 2 tablespoons of white vinegar. We could always add more, but once again, I am going to stir things up. So the amount of water in here is still a little bit low. If I had more liquid, then and for more movement, then we might see it being even more of a semi-solid. So it will likely have some tonal variation, but with the addition of acid, we may, not a ton, it's still very dark, but a little bit we're starting to see some color clear. Actually, you can now see the bottom through there. A lot of the color is in the yarn. So it is I would almost call this like a combination of who knows? I'm a little undecided if it is leaning more brown or not. But this is why we're gonna look at different depths of shade. But the other reason why we added the acid second is this project is a lot more about the totality of the color that we want to explore. So therefore we wanted a little less tonal variation, but you can see most of the color is already in the yarn just from me sitting here. So I'm now gonna go set this aside. I'm gonna stop moving it around and we'll get set up to make some other depths of shade. Since the 1% was saturated enough, I decided next to look at a 0.5%, which would have 50 milliliters of our dye stock, and a 2% depth of shade, which would have 200 milliliters of our dye stock. After I added the yarn and stirred things up, I added 2 tablespoons of white vinegar to each of the pots, and then set it aside overnight. Since this mixture does have a really good pigmentation to it, I decided to do 2 more less saturated colors. So we set things up again with 8 cups of water, but then this time I added only 25 or 12.5 milliliters of this stock solution to give us either a 0.25% depth of shade or a 0.125% depth of shade, respectively. After adding the yarn, then I added 2 tablespoons of white vinegar and set these aside with the rest so we can get a sense of the range and how this color looks when it's really pastel or when it's much more saturated.
The hue on the tonals is still a tiny bit of a mystery to me. The first look absolutely was more purple. This, you could, depending on the light, could either be purple or brown. I don't really know. It's somewhere in between. I think the color is giving me some Dharma espresso bean vibes, which I believe is supposed to be a brown, but for me, I feel like it's more of a purple. Maybe in another video, we will have to take a look of our Muk Color and decide what from the Dharma and Jacquard lineup it looks the closest to. The big thing though, is I didn't really observe any noticeable breaking with our tonals. It did all seem to absorb pretty quickly, but the tone felt even. I wasn't feeling many different shifts. So what is color breaking? Color breaking is when you have one mixture of dye and then you see it split apart into multiple hues. This is something we saw with that first look when we saw multiple different colors in the pan, but we didn't observe with the tonals. So now let's speckle and see if when we apply the dye really lightly onto the yarn, do we see 40 different hues? Probably not, from other experiences mixing dye powders together to then speckle. But I do expect that we will see more than one color. Let's go look.
I'm going to speckle on 3 skeins with the dry powder mixture. 2 Knit Pick Swish DK and 1 Knit Pick Stroll. And I do have a skein of Stroll that I added to that acid pre-soak. All of these had some vinegar added to them already. The same, actually, pre-soak that we used for the blanks at the very beginning. But I have this on hand if I need to wipe my gloves onto something. And then for when we're done, I can use it to wipe up the countertop. So that way I'm not wiping my fingers onto here and adding those unintentional streaks and thumbprints while we were flipping. And now I'm gonna go put my respirator mask back on. So I'm just gonna take a pinch of the dye and slowly let it fall onto the yarn, very lightly. There's still the chance for things to spread out, but they won't spread as much as if they were low immersion because there isn't liquid to dissolve and then carry them elsewhere. But I'm aiming for allish over. And so we're gonna speckle on and then wait a little bit to sort of see what we can see. So this is lighter than what I did for our first look, where I dumped it more. If I had diluted this with citric acid powder, it would be a little easier to get super fine speckles. But the goal isn't necessarily to get the finest speckles that you've ever seen. The goal is more to get a sense of what different colors do we see here. And I have a feeling it's going to be a lot of blue and red and some yellow. So, okay, I'm going to close that container. And now, on this little mop right here, I'm going to wipe my gloves. So this time, the color that we get on here could vary. I see some reds. This almost looks black to me. Some colors, just like with the sticks that I used earlier, some colors stick more to your gloves than others, but that's pretty interesting. The speckles are dark for sure, and I absolutely see red specks, I see some blue specks, and then some, which means indeterminate. Down there you can see a very red one, but right here you can definitely see there's some red specks, there are some blue specks, and then some that almost read black. It's really pretty. This type of effect is not unlike what I might see with some pre-mixed colors. It just so happens that we made our own mixture this time. So we do see color breaking in this mixture, which is not a huge surprise. But you'll notice that we see like 3 different colors. I'm sure there'll be some yellow that sort of shows up at some point. But we really see 3 main colors when there's definitely more than 3 pigments in this mixture. There are definitely different colors. There are areas that feel more pink, areas that feel more red. Sometimes I've seen, I think, 2 different blues, but this is absolutely, absolutely spectacular and super fun. Super, super fun. Whereas this color on the yarn mop looks very black. Like, not like the color that I saw on the first look at all, which is cool. Although I suppose that depending on how well mixed things are, that could affect some of the colors that we see at some point.
I flipped the yarn over and continued to speckle our Muk dye color on the other side, wiping my hand on the yarn mop in between any subsequent flips. This time I didn't really wait any time before flipping more, but flipped the skeins inside out and continued to lightly add more speckles until I was satisfied with the color coverage.
Okay, I think I'm pretty satisfied. Some of these specks are spreading out a little bit, but we've got multicolored and it's great. I'm now gonna move this over into my steamer basket to steam set for 30 minutes. And now with our yarn mop, we will wipe down everything that is on the counter. And we'll potentially save this for the end. Who knows if we'll have other leftovers to play with. But I will probably steam set this separately once the other speckled yarn is done. But actually, it was bluish, and I think wiping it definitely picked up more reds. So that's pretty fun.
Here are the speckles, and I do see yellow. Oh, I see some green. I see a lot of like purple. I think that deepest color is a very purple color. Ooh, I see hot pink and red. There are a lot of different colors in here, and I am very excited to see this dry. Let's remove these. Ooh, those colors. This is beyond fun with all of these colors in here. It is very, very multicolored. I don't think I've seen multicolored speckles quite this extreme before. This is awesome. Whoa, color breaking. I think that even now, compared to like after I've washed the yarn, which will come up later, there are so many colors that I see here. Now we're seeing individual pigments, some we're seeing maybe where some of those pigments landed on top of each other, but there's a lot of colors in there. This is a very cool mixture to speckle with. That might be the winning technique. Another thing I do want to try at some point is to mix this with citric acid powder and see how that varies, because if the dyes coat the citric acid powder, we might see less breaking apart into different colors. I don't know. Something to try for sure. But now I want to know if this color will break when we dip dye. So as I mentioned, breaking is when you see a color mixture break apart into different hues. And this color absolutely has a chance of doing that with dip dyeing. We've seen, something left at the bottom leave a little bit of a yellow finish from that dye stock. And some of these colors that are in this mix, like that fuchsia and some of the fluorescent green pigment in Kelly Green and Chartreuse, those take longer to bind. Those colors break on their own. But is that enough at 1/40th of a proportion to see it break on yarn? I don't know. So let's go and add 1 gram of dye to our dye pot and dip dye some Stroll to see if we can see colors break.
In my 8-quart pot, I have 16 cups of water. And we're gonna add 100 milliliters of that 1% stock solution we made of our mixture Muk Purple. I'm not quite sure what we've named it yet. So I've added that, and I'm gonna add just 1 tablespoon of white vinegar. Actually, no, I'm gonna do 2 tablespoons of white vinegar. This will give us the equivalent of 1 tablespoon of vinegar in 8 cups of water. And that is sort of a starting place for me for a lot of these dip dyeing breaking videos. And so stirring this up, and now the pot is still cold, but we're gonna let it heat up so then we can dip dye our skein of Stroll. Okay, we are warm. It's a little bit bubbly, but let's start dip dyeing our Stroll because I want to know if this breaks. While I was waiting for this to heat up, I did go and try to see if I could find a pre-mixed color that looks like this. And I think the closest that I saw might be like espresso bean or purple haze from Dharma's acid dye collections. I don't know, I'm not seeing breaking so far. And it's already getting really pastel. There is a chance that there are some pigments that will bind later on, but we definitely see breaking with speckling, like unquestionable. Like there's breaking with speckling, but it's fairly pastel already. I could go slower, but I should have gone a lot slower. I mean, I would say what's in the pot feels more red to me, but see, like when I dip that end in, there is so little color left that it's really, really hard to say. And it is still, the water is still very purplish. So I don't know. I am fairly surprised. I mean, that is just looking purple to me still at the end. I'm not seeing a real change of color in the water. And well, we'll see in 10 minutes if we see something with this end. See, we really did wait and absorb most of the color on the other end. But we will also be trying this on a non-superwash base, so maybe we'll see something different. Anyway, I am gonna wait 10 minutes and then we will check back in. So, let's see. I see like some purplish hints. There is a little bit of color left in there. I think I'm gonna go ahead and add more acid. Okay, this cup just has a tiny amount. Let's just add like a good healthy glug of white vinegar. And I'm gonna let this heat, leave this on low heat for 10 more minutes. Then I'm gonna turn off the heat, let things cool completely in the pot so then we can wash it. All right, let's take a look at this dip dyed yarn. It's still a little bit warm. I would say it's really pretty. I wouldn't necessarily call it broken, but I do not see any pigments or residual yellow here in the pot.
I'm honestly a bit surprised. I have mixed, say, with Dharma black and purple pop, and we see beautiful breaking. But again, it's all about proportion. And if most of the colors bind at similar rates, then we might not see a shift in the colors. So I don't know. But remember, this is a great reminder that just because you see colors break with speckles doesn't mean you might be able to capture that with dip dyeing or some kind of pour technique. So just because something breaks one way in one situation doesn't mean it will in the other. If you would like to see some really awesome examples of color breaking, go and look for some of my Breaking Wilton's Violet videos here on the channel. With food coloring, it is extremely easy to exaggerate the way that colors break because there are really only 5 pigments of food coloring that are approved in the US that are used frequently, and those bind to yarn at dramatically different rates depending on acidity and heat. So it makes it very easy to get a super bright color at one end of the yarn when you dip dye, and then a different bright color at the other. And with acid dyes, there's some colors that do break dramatically. But a lot of them, if they break at all, it's a lot more subtle, at least with regards to dip dyeing. So I would say right now, we will try this again on a non-superwash yarn. We're gonna dip dye Wool of the Andes worsted weight yarn because since overall colors bind slower to non-superwash wool, there's a chance we could see something that we could capture. But honestly, I'm not really holding my breath here because it didn't even seem like there was something that I had missed on the Stroll. So let's go try the Wool of the Andes.
We have 16 cups, although some may have evaporated, of plain tap water with 2 tablespoons of white vinegar. Now I'm going to add 100 milliliters of our 1% stock solution. I am going to rinse it. I didn't rinse the last one, but I figured I would for this. And now I'm coming in with 100 grams of our pre-soaked Wool of the Andes worsted weight yarn, and I'm going to try to dip dye a little bit slower than the last one. But what's really interesting is that the color during the stream looked incredibly purple. And when it was drying, it looked incredibly purple. And under artificial light, it's looking a little more brown. Cool toned brown, more purple still than say pecan brown, but a little ambiguous. So like to me this looks purplish, but I think that it is on that earthy purple line, and well, Keith said it was brown. So we'll see. But even if it is brown, it is a beautiful color. When I am trying to break, typically as I add more yarn in, I'm looking for there to be a shift in color. What I want to see is when I place a next bit of yarn in, the color doesn't just feel like a lighter version of what was in there already, but instead that color feels like the hue is shifting. And despite the fact that we have all those different colors in the speckles, I don't see that. Now, what I don't know is if I were to take the dye and sort of have some kind of mortar and pestle or something to really, really try to shift, or like to really grind the powders together versus just lightly stirring, if we would still see all those multicolored speckles. I've tried having a random mix of leftover dye powders together before, and I mean, I've tried that a few times, and I didn't necessarily see speckles in all the colors. So, I mean, maybe It's just really, really hard to say. I mean, the color that's left is getting more and more pastel, but I can't even tell like what color the liquid is. And as I add more and more, it is looking a little bit pinkish, but the color is not shifting that much. At least not that I can see right now. There's a chance the color is getting warmer, but I think now I'm gonna add the whole thing in. And guess what? We've dipped for about 2 minutes. So it is not the most aggressive dip dye. I think it is very, very subtle like the last one, but I am gonna leave this here on the heat for 10 minutes and then we'll come and check in. So, I don't know, maybe, ooh, we've got like a bit of a very reddish purple finish, which honestly isn't that surprising. That isn't surprising. So now I'm gonna do like what I did with the Stroll, add a good splash of vinegar. I'm gonna heat it for 10 more minutes, then we will turn off the heat entirely. And, well, it broke dramatically with speckles, more dramatically than I even expected at first. So that is something we'll be playing with more for sure. But I mean, I think it's a lovely, lovely muted, deep color. It just didn't necessarily dramatically break, which surprised me a lot. It's now the next morning, but I did want to show there is a tinge of some pink left in the pot. And to me, more so than the other colors, this one does feel fairly brown to me. So, interesting. Very interesting.
Was there breaking? Not really. There is a chance that there are more purple pigments that bind first, and then some more pigments that lean more brown and yellow that bind later on. But I think that if that's breaking, it is super, super subtle and hard to say for sure. What we can do is, once everything's dry, compare the hues we see on our dip dyed skeins across the hues that we see from our various tonals at different depths of shade, and we can see if the colors feel different. The one place that is making me think that there could be a little bit of breaking is if you go back to that first look. When the dye was cold and I moved it before things set, it was very purple. When I let some heat apply and then I moved things around, the halo was a little bit more brown there. It's very subtle, very subtle. So, not very much breaking. I think that the winning technique with this Muk mixture is definitely the speckling. Speaking of our Muk mixture, during the live stream, someone suggested that we should just call this color Muk, since it's a little bit of a dusty purple, maybe it's going brown, but just calling it Muk. And if you're wondering why, here is the Pokemon Muk. We're a Pokemon loving family around here, and I have a feeling that my 7-year-old will really appreciate this name. So as of right now, unless I determine the color is more of a brown, Muk with a K feels very appropriate. But anyway, let's go wash the yarn.
I'm not going to wash all of the yarn on camera, but I do want to wash some of the most saturated colors to see if we see bleeding. Because all of these 40 dyes, some work differently, some don't dissolve very easily, and some bleed a lot when washing. But this washing was really uneventful. I washed the cool yarn in tap water, cool tap water, with a little bit of dish soap and did not see any bleeding, whether it was with the dip dyed yarns or with the speckled yarn. I will go ahead and wash the 2% depth of shade once we have heat set that, because since that's more saturated, there could be a chance of bleeding, but so far this Muk color is behaving extraordinarily well. There are many, many Jacquard acid dye colors that do break with various techniques. And that is something that would be super fun to take advantage of. But I think, and I'm really excited to like lay these out and look at them, I think that there's really something fun about the totality and randomness that are in these mops. Especially since I hadn't really looked at them like spread out in any kind of way during the stream itself. And great news, I'm not seeing any bleeding. There was a chance with this. Actually, there was a chance with our Muk Color as well. But, I mean, it's just fun to have all 40 pre-mixed colors here all on one blank. And I am really, I don't know, it's silly fun. It's good, silly fun. During the stream, someone asked me, you know, why? What's the point of doing this? And the point is just to see, will we get multicolored speckles? Will we get a color that breaks with dip dyeing? And I think that it's just so much fun. But I will say, I did not anticipate that the coolest result would be the speckles, but I think that might be the coolest result. But anyway, I don't see any bleeding. So I'm gonna rinse out all the soap and put this in the spin dryer, hang it up to dry, and let's come back and see how those tonals are doing. It is now the next morning. Let's take a look at all 5 of these tonals together for the first time. And let's see. So dry, the dip dyed yarn is starting to feel a little brownish almost. There's a hint of color, not very much left. And at our 1%, the 0.5% seems clear, and I think our 2% may, yeah, this one still has a little bit of color in it. So I think my plan is to put the 2% in a kettle with all of the liquid and heat set it that way. Whereas these 4, I am going to steam set in a steamer basket. So right now to me, especially this 0.5%, it feels sort of like a dusty purple, but it is leaning brown for sure. It's definitely leaning brown. This color just looks different in different situations, different types of dyeing, and whether we're under more natural light or artificial light. So we will reserve judgment, total judgment, for once it is dry. But I do actually think it's a very pretty, it's a muted color for sure. But I do think that it is a very lovely color. So I'll steam set these 4 for 30 minutes. I'll heat set the 2% for however long it needs. And then we will get ready to wash the yarn. The little bit of extra red left behind isn't super unusual. I did see a little bit something like this on the worsted weight yarn. After 30 minutes, let's see. I don't know if that's the same amount of color. There's still that residual pink color here in the pot. So I'm gonna turn off the heat and let the yarn cool off in here. We'll see if more of that absorbs or if that is just a pigment that isn't soluble and so therefore won't absorb to the yarn at this 2% depth of shade. Here is our 2% depth of shade, and I don't know if it's a brown or a purple still. I will say their water mostly cleared. When I was wringing it out, there was a hint of yellow that went in there. So that is something to think about. But so far, I don't see any bleeding. Adding some dish soap, that doesn't mean that there won't be. I will probably wash the other tonals off camera because if we're gonna see bleeding, we are likely to see it from our deepest color. But you can see why I didn't necessarily go to a 4% as this is fairly deep. Maybe there is a hair of color in the wash, but nothing super significant. And yeah, I am absolutely struggling to define this. It is feeling, it does vary based on the light. Certainly if it's the brown, it's a purplish brown. But anyway, I am gonna go stick this through my spin dryer and hang it up to dry. Now we have to just wait because
I don't know what color this is. Is it purple? Is it brown? Part of the answer is it depends on the color of light in the room you're in. I have found while the yarn was drying that under natural light, it looks more purple. But then under a yellowish artificial light, it looks more brown. Probably because the light is adding some yellow to everything. So, ooh, I mean, it's not a blurple. What would be a browpul? Browpullo? I don't know. I don't know a good name. Let me know down below for a brown purple combo name. Or maybe that name is espresso bean. I will do that. I will do that comparison probably in the next video. So stay tuned. But now let's go look at the finished dry yarn and see if I can figure out what color this is.
Looking at the finished yarn, I'm still having trouble putting my finger on the hue because it is not a yellowish brown. And I would be hesitant to even call it a reddish brown. It is very cool toned. And so that's why the purplish brown feels a little bit best. But also just looking at different swatches of like, these are colors of brown and purple and gray. It's sort of in that intermediate area that isn't defined by any of them. But I would be okay, I suppose, calling it a brown. I just don't have a more descriptive name. If we take another look at our quote first look, I still feel a very dusty purple feeling in here. There's definitely elements that do feel brown, but in this main area there is, and over here it does feel more purple to me, especially when you compare it with this blue that we saw at the very beginning. Actually, that area looks a little more brown, but this one looks more purple. There does seem to be, and we'll look at these tonals versus the dip dyed in a second. I do think that there is some element of breaking and that there are some reddish pigments that bind first and then some more brownish totality of pigments that bind a little later on. But we did know immediately from this first look that this Muk dye would break with speckles, that there are multiple different hues in here, and that it was something that would be really fun to explore. For our tonals, we looked at 5 different depths of shade: 2%, 1%, 0.5%, 0.25%, and then 1.25%. This Muk mixture is fairly pigmented. Maybe we could have gone even darker than a 2%, but this is not a pastel color on its own. And that's likely because a lot of the colors in the Jacquard line are fairly pigmented. They don't have a lot of premixed pastels or paler colors. Again, looking at the lighter colors, I mean, I don't know. I might, if I just looked at this one, call it a dusty purple by itself. I don't think I would call this a tan, but whatever they are, it is certainly a neutral color. It is a neutral brown, purple, gray. I don't know how to define it, but it does mean that if you look at the totality of the 40 colors that we combined, they are relatively well balanced if we ended up with something that is so neutral and hard to classify. The yarn mops that we made on these blanks as we were mixing the dyes almost look like splatter paint. And it is, again, I think really incredible to think that all 40 of these colors, there are 40 individual colors on each of these blanks. Yeah, some of the colors might be in 2 spots because of the way I was wiping it on very randomly, but there are 40 distinct color mixtures applied separately onto each of these blanks. And there is some color penetration through to the other side, but there's also less color on the wrong side, which means that when these are unraveled, they will be completely random. There will be speckles and splotches of colors, and it's great that they are double-stranded because that means that you could get 2 identical, wild, random colored socks out of these blanks. And it's just really, really fun to see what all of these colors mix together to become. With dip dyeing, did this color break? I actually think it might have, just a little bit. I'm not sure if it's going to come up on camera, but I feel like this deepest end has less red in it than this palest depth of shade yarn that we dyed. This feels more almost pink and purple, and this very much feels like a tan. Looking at this Stroll, this 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon skein as a whole, I feel more reds at this end than I do at that final end, which does just feel more brown. There's a hint of some pink in it maybe as well, but the tone, like it feels almost yellower than the other end. I feel like some of this is a little more exaggerated and a little bit easier to see here on the wool of the Andes, which is 100% Peruvian highland wool. This shade is absolutely more brown than the 0.5%. There's just either, if you're gonna say there's less red or more yellow in it, it is a very different hue than what we see from just diluting the color. So I therefore would say it does break with dip dyeing. There's more reds and then we see more brown at the end. And that's similar to what we observed with that first look, where when I speckled on the dye and then we moved it, after letting some heat set, it looked more brown than when we moved everything right in the beginner. It was more purpley, a little bit more red or pink. It is super subtle. It is super, super subtle. This isn't something super dramatic, but it is present. The star of this video, of this project, is by far the speckled yarn, which isn't to say I don't love the beautiful neutral color we got, but this speckled mixture is just so exciting. There are so many different colors that you see here. I mean, I see pink, orange, red, a little bit of green. I see some yellow in spots, which maybe is a little off camera, a few different blues, and then sort of a brown or purple. There are these mixtures that just go through it all, and it is so much fun. I don't think I have used any other dye that has broken this dramatically as a mixture. And likely it is because we had 40 different pre-mixed colors we added in, and who knows how many pigments are present in those 40 colors, but we still had 40 colors mixed in. And then while we stirred it up and I mixed as well as I could, I didn't grind it or mill it or do something to try to break up these powders in any kind of way. It is possible that if I mix this powder with citric acid, we might see fewer colors overall, because when these colors coat the citric acid powder, sort of stick together and all go in one spot, we might feel more of an average. But something about this is just really, really fun and fantastic and completely unique. And we certainly would not have anything that feels remotely like this if I speckled with all 40 colors onto the yarn individually. The placement of them wouldn't be as perfectly random as what we see here. Even with this rainbow of colors in the speckles, it does still feel fairly neutral and works really great with these other colors. And I'm really excited to play with this Muk mixture more in the future. We had a yarn mop that we used while speckling. And so I used my gloved fingers to speckle the color onto the yarn and then wiped it on here. And amazingly, a lot of the color that we wiped on is less warm toned. It is more gray all over. All over, we see a lot more gray, especially when compared to that first look. But don't forget, in our first look, we did get some bluish color based on what was left on the spoon. So there's absolutely some pigments that are more likely to stick to your gloves than others. And so this is really interesting. But I will be reusing this mop. There's not that much color on it. I'm going to be reusing it the next time I look at this Muk combination as our yarn mop for that video. I had so much fun with this project and mixing our own custom dry dye powder, which ultimately is not something I do as often. Normally when I'm mixing my dye colors, I'm mixing them as the liquids. So I think I do want to play with more dry mixtures and speckling in the future. This result with those speckles is exactly what I would have hoped for. Which one of these final colors is your favorite? Do you like the more wild rainbow mops, or do you really appreciate some of these neutrals or the rainbow speckles? Please let me know down in the comments below, and what other techniques you would like to see me explore more with this Muk color.
Is it a purple? Is it a brown? I don't know. My opinion changes in the light if I'm looking at one. This is the 1% by itself versus with all the others. Like right now, in this light, it feels a little bit more purple to me. Although on camera it might still look brown. But I did also take a picture of all 5 of the depths of shade in natural light. And well, clearly we have a purplish brown type color. But you know what we can say? It's not green. We could definitively say it is not green. As for the color name, I still think I want to call it Muk with a K after the Pokemon. This purpley Pokemon is definitely more purple than I think what we have here, but it does have another form that is very multicolored, the Alolan form, and I feel like it fits and feels appropriate for a solid and then speckled form of a color. Once again, I'm very impressed with the neutral balance of colors that we got from combining all 40 Jacquard acid dye colors. So I would say that if you guessed brown or purple, maybe even pink, you're all kind of right. It's a very neutral color, very hard to define. Some might call it mud, but I think it is a really lovely neutral, of which I don't think I have a good pre-mixed color in my collection that would give us this hue. So I think that in the next video, I am going to try to take this Muk dye and compare it to a lot of other colors that I have, so then maybe we get closer in and figuring out what the color is. We'll see. But make sure you are subscribed and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. I always publish new content at least twice a week on Tuesday and Friday mornings, even during holiday seasons, and you don't want to miss any of it. I'd like to give a huge thank you to everyone who pre-ordered some of these colorways without knowing what we were going to expect. There may actually be a few more of this Muk color in my Etsy shop. You'll find a link to the shop and to my Patreon down in the video description. It's really worth checking out if you love the yarn I dye and want to bring some home. Now there's one more big question that remains. Do I need to mix together all of my Dharma acid dyes? There are more than 80 different colors there. And there's a lot more pastel premixed colors as well. So, do you think it's worth the shot? Do you want another epically long stream? And then epically long Dyepot weekly video? I don't know. Let me know. Thank you so much for watching.